Lieutenant Amelia Blaze. Hawthorne stood at perfect attention in the front row of Naval Amphibious Base Coronado's graduation ceremony. Her dress whites pressed to military perfection, the silver Trident pin gleaming on her chest. She had just become one of only 47 women in history to complete Navy SEAL training. But her eyes kept scanning the packed auditorium, searching desperately for one face that wasn't there. Captain Rodriguez was mid-sentence in his address to the graduating class when something made him stop speaking entirely. His weathered face went completely pale as his gaze fixed on Amelia's left hand, specifically on the antique emerald ring she wore on her pinky finger. The entire ceremony of 2,000 people fell into confused silence as the decorated Vietnam veteran began walking directly toward her, his voice barely a whisper. "Where did you get that ring? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you." What Captain Rodriguez saw in that moment would uncover a 50-year military secret that connected 3 generations of women warriors, and transform what should have been Amelia's proudest day into something far more extraordinary than she ever could have imagined. Lieutenant Amelia Hawthorne, 27 years old, had just completed the most grueling military training program in the world. 26 months of hell that had broken 847 candidates who started alongside her. She was the only woman in her class of 23 graduates, and she had earned every brutal step of that achievement. Born and raised in the mountain town of Pine Haven, Colorado, Amelia had been raised by her grandmother, Rosalind Hawthorne. After her parents died in a car accident when she was 8 years old, Rosalind had been everything to Amelia: mother, father, best friend, and fiercest supporter. A retired Army nurse who had served 2 tours in Vietnam, Rosalind had taught Amelia that strength wasn't about being the biggest or the loudest, but about never giving up when others needed you most. "Courage, my little warrior," Rosalind would whisper when tucking young Amelia into bed, "is not the absence of fear. It's doing what's right even when you're terrified." But Rosalind Hawthorne had died of cancer just 6 months ago. Exactly 3 weeks before, Amelia entered the final phase of SEAL training, Hell Week, the most brutal 132 hours any military candidate could endure. Amelia had wanted to take emergency leave for the funeral, but Rosalind had made her promise something during their last conversation in the hospital room overlooking Denver's skyline. "Listen to me carefully, little warrior," Rosalind had said, her voice weak but her grip on Amelia's hand surprisingly strong. "I'm not going to see you graduate, but I need you to promise me something sacred. Wear my ring during your graduation ceremony. This ring ... She had twisted the antique emerald band off her own finger, "has been in our family for 3 generations of women who served their country. Your great-grandmother wore it when she became one of the first female pilots in World War II. I wore it when I received my Bronze Star in Vietnam. Now it's yours." The ring was beautiful but understated, a single emerald surrounded by tiny diamonds, set in worn gold that spoke of decades of wear. Rosalind had never told Amelia much about her military service, always changing the subject when her granddaughter asked about her Vietnam years. "Some stories are for another time, little warrior," she would say with a distant look in her eyes. That another time never came. Rosalind passed away peacefully on a Tuesday morning while Amelia was in the middle of underwater demolition training at the Naval Special Warfare Center in Coronado, California. Amelia received the news via Red Cross message and was granted 72 hours emergency leave for the funeral. She had flown from San Diego to Denver with tears streaming down her face, clutching the small velvet box containing her grandmother's ring. The funeral had been surprisingly well attended for someone Amelia thought had lived a quiet life. Dozens of older veterans, both men and women, had approached her with stories about Rosalind's service that Amelia had never heard before. A retired colonel had told her that her grandmother had saved 14 wounded soldiers during the Tet Offensive, A former Navy nurse mentioned that Rosalind had received commendations for working 72 hours straight during a field hospital crisis. But the details were always vague, and when Amelia tried to press for specifics, people would smile sadly and say, "Your grandmother was a hero, honey. That's all you need to know." Now, 6 months later, Amelia sat in the graduation ceremony wearing her grandmother's ring as promised. She had made it through Hell Week by imagining Rosalind cheering her on. During the 20-mile ocean swim that broke most candidates, she had looked down at the emerald ring and found strength she didn't know she possessed. When hypothermia nearly claimed her during surf torture exercises, she had pressed the ring against her heart and whispered, "Courage is doing what's right, even when you're terrified." She had invited no one to her graduation ceremony. Rosalind was gone, and she had no other family. Her few close friends from high school were scattered across the country, building their own lives. This was supposed to be her moment of triumph, achieved alone, carrying forward her grandmother's legacy of service. The ceremony had begun at 1400, hours sharp on the parade grounds of Naval Amphibious Base Coronado. The Pacific Ocean provided a stunning backdrop as families filled every available seat to watch their sons and daughters receive the coveted Navy SEAL Trident pin. Amelia had felt proud but also profoundly alone as she stood with her 22 fellow graduates, knowing that she was the only one without family in the audience. Captain Miguel Rodriguez, the base commander, was a decorated 30-year Navy veteran who had personally overseen hundreds of SEAL graduations. He was known for his inspiring speeches about honor, courage, and commitment. His voice carried easily across the parade grounds as he began addressing the gathered families and new SEALs about the significance of the Trident pin they were about to receive. "Ladies and gentlemen, families and friends," Captain Rodriguez had begun, his voice strong and ceremonial. "Today we celebrate not just the graduation of 23 exceptional warriors, but the continuation of a legacy that stretches back to the underwater demolition teams of World War II. These men and women have proven that they possess the physical strength, mental toughness, and moral courage required to earn the title of Navy SEAL." But something had caught his attention. As his eyes swept across the front row of graduates, his gaze had stopped suddenly on Amelia. More specifically, on her left hand. The emerald ring that she wore on her pinky finger, worn exactly as her grandmother had instructed, was clearly visible as she stood at attention. Captain Rodriguez's words had died in his throat. His weathered face, marked by decades of sun and salt water, went completely pale. The confident bearing of a career military officer faltered as he stared at that ring with an expression that combined shock, recognition, and something that looked almost like reverence. The silence stretched uncomfortably. 2,000 people waited as their ceremony commander stood frozen, staring at a single graduate. Fellow officers exchanged concerned glances. Families shifted in their seats. The other graduates remained at attention, but confusion rippled through their ranks. Finally, Captain Rodriguez found his voice, though it was barely above a whisper that somehow carried across the silent parade grounds. "Lieutenant Hawthorne, where did you get that ring?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The ring had been more than just jewelry to Rosalind Hawthorne. It was a sacred covenant passed down through 3 generations of women who had refused to let war define their limitations. When Rosalind placed that emerald band in Amelia's trembling hands 6 months ago, she wasn't just giving her granddaughter a family heirloom. She was passing down a legacy of courage that had been tested in the darkest moments of American military history. "Promise me something that goes deeper than words, little warrior," Rosalind had whispered from her hospital bed, her fingers surprisingly strong as they closed around Amelia's hand. "This ring must be worn during your graduation ceremony. Not hidden in a pocket, not on a chain around your neck, visible, exactly as I'm showing you now," she had demonstrated, sliding the ring onto her own pinky finger where it caught the afternoon light streaming through the hospital window. Amelia had studied the ring carefully that day, noting details she'd never observed during her childhood. The emerald wasn't perfect. It had tiny inclusions that looked like stars when held up to the light. The gold band showed wear patterns that spoke of decades of constant use. Around the central stone, 12 tiny diamonds formed a circle, and inside the band, nearly worn smooth, was an inscription in script so small it was barely readable. "Courage lives here, 1943. "Grandma, what does the inscription mean? And why 1943? Amelia had asked, but Rosalind's eyes had grown distant, the way they always did when her Vietnam service came up in conversation. "Your great-grandmother, Captain Sarah Hawthorne, had this ring made when she became one of the first women to fly military transport planes during World War II. She wore it on every mission -147 flights over the European theater, carrying wounded soldiers back to safety. Never lost a single patient." Rosalind's voice had grown stronger as she spoke, as if drawing energy from the memory. "She gave it to me when I enlisted as an Army nurse in 1968. Told me that courage wasn't something you were born with. It was something you chose, moment by moment, when everything inside you wanted to run." Rosalind had paused, studying Amelia's face with the intensity that had always made her granddaughter feel like she was being evaluated for some crucial mission. "I wore this ring through 2 tours in Vietnam. Through nights when the hospital tents were under mortar fire and we kept operating on wounded soldiers by flashlight. Through the day I pulled 14 men out of a helicopter crash in the middle of a firefight. Through moments when I was so scared I could barely function, but people were dying and fear wasn't a luxury I could afford." Amelia had listened, mesmerized. Her grandmother had never shared these details before, always deflecting questions about her military service with gentle changes of subject or vague references to "just doing my job." "The ring went with me to places where women weren't supposed to be," Rosalind continued. "Places where people said we were too weak, too emotional, too fragile to handle the weight of life and death decisions. But every time I looked down at this emerald, I remembered that courage wasn't about being fearless. It was about being terrified and still showing up." Rosalind had then shared, "The most important part of the promise. You will graduate SEAL training, little warrior. I know this in my bones. And when you do, when you're standing in that ceremony receiving your Trident pin, this ring needs to be visible. Not because of superstition, but because some promises transcend the people who make them." "What do you mean?" Amelia had asked, though part of her was afraid of the answer. "There are people in the military who will remember this ring. People who served alongside your great-grandmother and me. People who witnessed things that never made it into official reports. Acts of courage that were too classified or too sensitive to be recorded in history books." Rosalind's grip on Amelia's hand had intensified. "When they see this ring at your graduation, they'll know that the legacy continues. They'll know that the Hawthorne women are still serving, still refusing to let other people's limitations define what we can achieve." Amelia had felt the weight of generations settling on her shoulders. "Grandma, what if I don't make it through training? What if I fail?" Rosalind had smiled then, the same fierce smile that had gotten Amelia through every childhood challenge, every moment of self-doubt, every time the world tried to convince her that she wasn't strong enough or tough enough or brave enough. "Failure isn't falling down, little warrior. Failure is staying down. The Hawthorne women don't stay down." She had pressed the velvet ring box into Amelia's hands with ceremony. "This ring has been with our family through D-Day, through Vietnam, through every war and conflict where American servicewomen have proven that courage has no gender. Now it's going to Navy SEAL training." 3 days later, Rosalind had passed away peacefully in her sleep. Amelia had returned to Coronado carrying not just grief, but the sacred weight of a promise that connected her to women she'd never met but whose blood ran through her veins. The promise had sustained her through the darkest moments of SEAL training. During Hell Week, when 80% of her fellow candidates had rung the bell and quit, Amelia had pressed the ring against her heart and whispered her great-grandmother's words, "Courage lives here." When instructors screamed that women didn't belong in special forces, she had looked down at the emerald and remembered that every generation of her family had heard the same doubts. During the 20-mile ocean swim that had broken even some of the strongest male candidates, hypothermia had begun setting in around mile 15. Amelia's vision had started tunneling, her strokes becoming erratic. But she had managed to look down at her hand, at the ring that had survived World War II and Vietnam, and found strength she didn't know existed. The ring had been with her through every phase, through combat diving, where she learned to navigate underwater in complete darkness, through advanced weapons training, where she qualified as an expert marksman with 7 different weapon systems, through SEER School, where she learned to survive, evade, resist, and escape an enemy territory. Now, after 26 months of the most demanding military training in the world, Amelia stood at graduation wearing her grandmother's ring exactly as promised. She had survived what 847 other candidates could not. She had earned her place among the most elite warriors in American military history, but she had no idea that wearing that ring would change everything, not just for her, but for secrets that had been buried for over 50 years. The promise she had made to her dying grandmother was about to unlock mysteries that would transform her understanding of her family's legacy and reveal why certain military records had been classified for half a century, standing at attention. In the California sunshine, Lieutenant Amelia Hawthorne was about to discover that some promises carry consequences far beyond what we can imagine when we make them. The emergency call came at 0547 hours, exactly 6 hours and 13 minutes before Amelia's graduation ceremony was scheduled to begin. Captain Rodriguez's secure satellite phone buzzed with the distinctive tone reserved for DEFCON 2 maritime emergencies, the kind of alert that meant American lives hung in the balance, and every minute of delay could mean the difference between rescue and recovery operations. The voice on the other end belonged to Admiral Patricia Blackstone, commander of Naval Special Warfare Command, speaking from the Pentagon's Crisis Management Center. Her words were clipped, urgent, carrying the weight of a situation spiraling beyond normal operational parameters. "Miguel, we have a catastrophic situation developing. In the South China Sea, the USS Intrepid went down 43 minutes ago after hitting an unmarked minefield approximately 180 nautical miles southeast of Taiwan. We've got 47 survivors trapped in an air pocket within the forward compartments of the vessel, currently resting at 240 feet below the surface." Rodriguez felt his stomach drop. The USS Intrepid was a guided missile destroyer carrying a crew of 312 sailors. If only 47 had survived the initial explosion and flooding, they were looking at one of the worst naval disasters in recent memory. "What's the tactical situation, Admiral?" Rodriguez asked, already knowing that this call meant his carefully planned day was about to be destroyed. "Chinese naval vessels are conducting routine exercises in the area, which means we have a narrow diplomatic window before this becomes an international incident. The survivors have maybe 8 to 10 hours of air remaining, but that's assuming the compartment seals hold. If those fail, we're looking at total loss of life within 2 hours." Admiral Blackstone's voice carried the strain of someone who had been managing crisis operations for the past hour while calculating impossible odds. "Miguel, I need your absolute best deep water salvage team assembled and airborne within 90 minutes. This is a precision operation requiring expertise in underwater welding, explosive breaching, and emergency medical extraction. We're talking about a rescue depth that pushes the absolute limits of human diving capability." Rodriguez closed his eyes, understanding immediately why this call had come to him personally. Of the 3,847 active Navy SEALs currently in service, Fewer than 12 possessed the specialized technical certifications required for emergency deep water vessel extractions at the depths they were discussing. And of those 12, only 4 were currently stationed within rapid deployment range of the South China Sea. Problem was devastating in its simplicity. Today was graduation day at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado. 3 of those 4 irreplaceable specialists were scheduled to be standing on the parade grounds in dress whites, receiving commendations for completing advanced underwater demolition courses. Without them, the rescue mission would fail before it began. "Admiral, you understand what you're asking," Rodriguez said quietly. Lieutenant Commander Harrison completed his deep water salvage certification last month. He's supposed to receive the Navy Cross today for his actions during the Iranian oil platform rescue. Petty Officer Williams just finished 18 months of specialized underwater welding training. And Master Chief Thompson is our only qualified emergency medical extraction specialist currently on the West Coast. "I understand completely, Miguel," Admiral Blackstone replied. "I also understand that 47 American sailors are going to die if we don't get our best people to that location within the next 4 hours." Rodriguez stared out his office window at the parade grounds, where maintenance crews were already setting up chairs and sound systems for the graduation ceremony. Families had been traveling for days to attend this event. Parents had taken time off work. Grandparents had flown across the country. Children had been pulled from school to watch their loved ones receive recognition for completing some of the most demanding military training in the world. In 6 hours, Lieutenant Amelia Hawthorne would become the 47th woman in history to receive the Navy SEAL Trident pin. Her grandmother had died 6 months ago, leaving Amelia with no family to witness this historic achievement. This ceremony represented the culmination of everything she had sacrificed, everything she had endured, everything she had fought to prove about women in combat roles. But 47 sailors were trapped underwater, their air running out with each passing minute. What about the backup teams from Norfolk and Pearl Harbor? Rodriguez asked, though he already knew the answer. Norfolk's team is committed to a classified operation in the Mediterranean. Pearl Harbor's specialists are still recovering from decompression, injuries sustained during last week's submarine rescue off Guam. "Miguel, your people are the only qualified personnel within deployment range. Without them, those sailors die." Rodriguez felt the familiar weight of command decisions that had no good answers. In 30 years of military service, he had learned that leadership often meant choosing between 2 equally important moral obligations. Knowing that either choice would carry consequences he would carry for the rest of his life. The technical requirements of the mission were unforgiving. The USS Intrepid lay at a depth that required specialized mixed gas breathing apparatus, emergency decompression protocols, and underwater cutting equipment that only a handful of military personnel knew how to operate safely. The survivors were trapped in a forward compartment that could only be reached by cutting through the vessel's reinforced hull, a procedure that required precision welding skills and intimate knowledge of naval architecture. Lieutenant Commander Harrison had spent the last 3 years developing the underwater breach and extraction techniques that had saved 14 sailors during the Iranian oil platform incident. Petty Officer Williams was one of only 7 active military personnel qualified to perform emergency underwater welding at depths exceeding 200 feet. Master Chief Thompson had medical training that included emergency field surgery, trauma stabilization, and decompression chamber operations. Without all 3 specialists working in perfect coordination, the rescue mission would fail. The physics were unforgiving. Any mistake in the cutting sequence could cause catastrophic flooding that would kill the survivors instantly. Any error in the medical extraction could result in decompression injuries that would be fatal before the victims reached the surface. "Admiral, I need to ask you something, and I need a completely honest answer," Rodriguez said. "Is this mission classified above my clearance level?" Are there tactical considerations you're not sharing? There was a long pause before Admiral Blackstone responded. Miguel, the USS Intrepid was conducting freedom of navigation operations in disputed waters. The minefield they hit wasn't on any current navigational charts. If we lose those sailors, and if the Chinese Navy reaches the wreck site before we complete recovery operations, this incident could escalate into something far beyond a rescue mission, Rodriguez understood. The sailors trapped underwater weren't just American lives. They were potential intelligence assets. Witnesses to activities that foreign powers might prefer remained permanently silenced. The rescue mission wasn't just about saving lives. It was about preventing an international incident that could destabilize an already volatile region. How much time do I have to make the decision? Rodriguez asked. The transport aircraft is already being fueled. I need your team wheels up in 73 minutes, or we miss our operational window entirely. Rodriguez looked at his watch. 0612 2 hours. In exactly 7 hours and 48 minutes, he was supposed to be pinning the Navy SEAL Trident on Lieutenant Amelia Hawthorne's dress whites, recognizing her as the 47th woman to complete the most demanding military training program in American history. Instead, he was about to make a decision that would devastate not just one ceremony, but the culmination of dreams that had sustained families through months of worry and pride. Admiral, Rodriguez said quietly, I need 5 minutes to consider the tactical implications and make the necessary personnel notifications. You have 5 minutes, Miguel. After that, those sailors' survival window starts closing permanently. Rodriguez hung up the secure phone and sat in the silence of his office, staring at the graduation ceremony schedule on his desk. In the margin, he had written a personal note to himself. Remember to mention Lt. Hawthorne's historic achievement, first woman in her family to complete SEAL training. He had no idea how historic that achievement truly was, or that the ring she would be wearing during the ceremony held secrets that would soon change everything. Captain Rodriguez stood alone in his office, holding 2 photographs that represented the impossible weight of command. In his left hand, the official graduation roster with 23 names, including Lieutenant Amelia Hawthorne, highlighted in blue ink, the notation he'd made to remind himself to acknowledge her historic achievement during his speech. In his right hand, a secure intelligence photo of the USS Intrepid taken just 18 hours ago, showing the destroyer's crew of 312 sailors going about their duties, unaware that most of them had less than 24 hours to live. The mathematics of the decision were brutal and unforgiving. 47 American sailors trapped in an air pocket that would become their tomb in approximately 7 hours. 3 irreplaceable rescue specialists whose presence at a graduation ceremony meant the difference between a successful rescue operation and a total loss of life. No alternatives, no backup plans, no way to serve both moral obligations without devastating consequences. Rodriguez walked to his office window and looked out at the parade grounds, where maintenance crews were positioning the final rows of chairs. He could see the families beginning to arrive early, some carrying flowers, others with professional cameras, all radiating the pride and excitement that came with witnessing their loved ones achieve something truly extraordinary. A grandmother in a wheelchair was being helped to a front row seat by what appeared to be 3 generations of her family, all wearing matching Navy t-shirts with someone's name and graduation date printed on the front. He thought about Lieutenant Hawthorne, probably in her quarters right now, carefully preparing her dress uniform with the same precision she had applied to every aspect of SEAL training. She would be adjusting her grandmother's ring, making sure it was positioned exactly as she had promised. She had no family coming to witness this moment. Rodriguez had personally reviewed the guest lists for all graduates, noting who might need additional support during the ceremony. Amelia's section had been blank except for a single notation: next of kin, deceased. The secure phone buzzed again. Admiral Blackstone's voice was tighter now. carrying the strain of someone monitoring multiple crisis streams simultaneously. Miguel. Satellite imagery shows the Chinese destroyer Changchun has altered course and is now approximately 6 hours from the wreck site. We've intercepted communications suggesting they're aware of the Intrepid situation and are positioning to reach the location under the pretense of offering humanitarian assistance. Rodriguez understood immediately. If Chinese naval forces reached the wreck first, they would control access to not just the survivors, but to the classified intelligence systems aboard the Intrepid. The rescue mission had just become a race against foreign intervention, with geopolitical implications that extended far beyond saving American lives. What's the current status of the survivors? Rodriguez asked. Still alive, but we're detecting increased carbon dioxide levels in their compartment. The air filtration system took damage during the initial explosion. Our naval architects estimate they have 6 to 7 hours before the air becomes unbreathable, assuming the structural integrity of their compartment holds. Admiral Blackstone's voice carried the weight of someone who had been calculating impossible odds for the past 2 hours. Miguel, I need you to understand something. Those 3 specialists aren't just our best hope, they're our only hope. Without Lieutenant Commander Harrison's breach and extraction expertise, we can't access the survivors safely. Without Petty Officer Williams' underwater welding capabilities, we can't create an escape route without flooding the compartment. Without Master Chief Thompson's emergency medical training, we can't treat the decompression injuries and hypothermia that survivors will inevitably suffer during extraction. Rodriguez closed his eyes, seeing the faces of his 3 specialists. Lieutenant Commander Harrison had been selected for today's ceremony specifically because of his heroic actions during the Iranian oil platform rescue, where he had saved 14 civilian contractors using techniques he had developed personally. Petty Officer Williams had completed specialized training that only 7 active military personnel had successfully finished, training that had cost the Navy over $2 million and 18 months of intensive instruction. Master Chief Thompson was scheduled to retire in 6 months after 28 years of exemplary service. Today's ceremony was meant to be a celebration of his final achievement before returning to civilian life. Admiral, I need to ask you something, and I need complete honesty, Rodriguez said. If we deploy these 3 specialists and the mission fails, if we lose them along with the Intrepid survivors, do we have any contingency plans for future deep water rescue operations? The pause that followed told Rodriguez everything he needed to know. Miguel, these 3 represent approximately 40% of our total deep water rescue capability on the Pacific Rim. Losing them would severely compromise our ability to respond to similar emergencies for at least 2 years while we train replacements. Weight of that admission settled over Rodriguez like a physical presence. He wasn't just risking 3 lives to save 47. He was potentially sacrificing the military's future ability to conduct similar rescues. But the alternative was allowing 47 sailors to die while their rescuers stood on a parade ground receiving recognition for their training. Rodriguez opened his desk drawer and pulled out a personal letter he had written to his own grandson, who was graduating from high school the same week as the SEAL ceremony. In the letter, he had tried to explain what military service meant, what sacrifice looked like, and why some decisions carried consequences that extended far beyond the immediate moment. Leadership, he had written, isn't about making easy choices between right and wrong. It's about making impossible choices between 2 rights, knowing that either decision will cause pain, but that choosing nothing would cause even more. He looked again at the graduation roster, his eyes stopping on each name. These weren't just military personnel. They were someone's children, someone's pride, someone's reason for hope. The families gathering outside had planned for months, saved money for travel, requested time off from work, all to witness a moment that represented years of sacrifice and achievement. But 47 sailors were dying, and every minute of delay reduced their chances of survival. Rodriguez picked up his secure phone and made the call that would change everything. Admiral Blackstone, this is Captain Rodriguez. I'm authorizing immediate deployment of Lieutenant Commander Harrison, Petty Officer Williams, and Master Chief Thompson for the USS Intrepid rescue operation. Estimated wheels up in 47 minutes. Acknowledged, Miguel. I know what this decision costs. Rodriguez felt the familiar hollow sensation that came with command decisions that had no perfect answers. Admiral, I need you to understand something. These 3 specialists aren't just missing a ceremony, they're abandoning families who have traveled thousands of miles to witness their achievements. Lieutenant Commander Harrison's parents flew in from Alaska. Petty Officer Williams' wife is 8 months pregnant with their first child. Master Chief Thompson's grandchildren made banners with his name on them. I understand completely, Miguel. When this operation concludes successfully, I'll personally ensure that their families understand the magnitude of what their loved ones accomplished today. After ending the call, Rodriguez sat in his empty office, staring at the graduation ceremony program he had spent weeks perfecting. In 2 hours, he would have to walk onto those parade grounds and explain to 2,000 people why 3 of the ceremony's most honored guests wouldn't be present for their recognition. He would have to look into the faces of families who had sacrificed and planned and hoped, and tell them that duty had called their loved ones away from their moment of celebration. But most difficult of all, he would have to continue the ceremony as planned, honoring the achievements of the remaining graduates while knowing that somewhere over the Pacific Ocean, 3 of the military's finest were racing toward a rescue mission that might cost them their lives. Rodriguez opened his computer and began typing the hardest message he had ever composed, a notification to the families of his deployed specialists, explaining why their moment of pride would have to wait for another day. He had no idea that in making this decision, he was setting in motion events that would transform the graduation ceremony into something far more extraordinary than anyone could imagine. At 10:30 hours, exactly 3.5 hours before the ceremony was scheduled to begin, Lieutenant Amelia Hawthorne stood in front of her quarters mirror, adjusting her dress white uniform for the 7th time. The Navy SEAL Trident pin gleamed on her chest, but her attention kept returning to her grandmother's emerald ring, positioned exactly on her left pinky finger as promised. She had been awake since 05:00, unable to sleep through what should have been the most important morning of her military career. The base had an unusual energy today. She could hear helicopters taking off with uncommon frequency, and the normal morning training schedule seemed disrupted. Through her window, she watched ground crews loading emergency medical equipment onto transport aircraft with the kind of urgency that suggested something significant was developing. But graduation day preparations continued around the unusual activity, and Amelia tried to focus on the milestone she was about to achieve. She had received exactly 0 messages on her phone. No congratulatory texts, no last-minute well wishes, no family members confirming travel arrangements. The silence was exactly what she had expected, but it still created a hollow feeling in her chest. Every other graduate had spent the past week fielding calls from excited relatives, making dinner reservations for celebration meals, coordinating photo sessions with multiple generations of proud family members. Amelia's celebration would consist of a quiet dinner alone at the base commissary, followed by a video call to her grandmother's grave marker via the cemetery's virtual memorial system, a promise she had made to herself to share this moment with Rosalind's memory, even if only symbolically. At 11:47 hours, the first sign that something was seriously wrong came through the base communication system. Lieutenant Commander Harrison, who was scheduled to receive the Navy Cross during today's ceremony, failed to report for his final uniform inspection. His absence was noted, but not yet alarming. Senior officers occasionally had last-minute administrative responsibilities that delayed their ceremonial preparations. Petty Officer Williams, scheduled to receive recognition for completing specialized underwater welding training, also missed his pre-ceremony briefing. His pregnant wife, Jennifer, had arrived from San Diego 2 days early, so excited about the ceremony that she had packed 3 different outfits to ensure she looked perfect for the photographs. She waited in the family reception area, checking her phone repeatedly for updates from her husband about when she could see him before the ceremony began. Master Chief Thompson's absence became undeniable when his entire extended family, 12 people who had driven from 3 different states to witness his final military recognition before retirement, gathered at the ceremonial gate at noon and were told that he was temporarily unavailable for family visits due to operational requirements. Thompson's youngest granddaughter, 8-year-old Sarah, clutched a hand-painted banner that read "Hero Grandpa" in glittery letters. She had spent 2 weeks working on the banner with her art teacher, planning to hold it up during the moment when her grandfather received his commendation. Now she sat in the family waiting area, asking her parents every few minutes when Grandpa would be able to see her artwork. The whispers started around 1200 hours, spreading through the family reception areas like a slow-burning fuse. 3 of the ceremony's most prominent honorees had apparently been deployed on emergency operations. The official word from base communications was carefully neutral, minor scheduling adjustments to accommodate operational requirements. But military families understood the euphemisms when the Navy said operational requirements. It meant something serious was happening somewhere else. By 12:30 hours, 30 minutes before families would be escorted to the ceremony seating, the gossip had evolved into speculation and then into barely concealed frustration. Harrison's parents, who had flown from Anchorage, Alaska, using vacation days and spending money they couldn't easily afford, sat in stunned silence as they processed the news that their son wouldn't be present for his recognition ceremony. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," Harrison's father muttered to his wife. 28 years in the military, and they still can't let him have one day that's just about celebrating his achievements. There's always another crisis, always another emergency that's more important than family. William's wife, Jennifer, felt the first contractions of what would later be diagnosed as stress-induced early labor pains. At 8 months pregnant, the combination of travel exhaustion, emotional disappointment, and the crushing realization that her husband was missing their planned celebration triggered a medical response that would require immediate attention from base medical personnel. Thompson's family handled the news with the stoic acceptance that came from 3 generations of military service, but his granddaughter Sarah's tears were heartbreaking to witness. "I made the banner special for today," she kept repeating. "When will Grandpa see my banner?" For the remaining 20 graduates, the absence of 3 senior honorees cast a shadow over what should have been an unqualified celebration. These men weren't just fellow SEAL graduates, they were leaders, mentors, and examples of what dedication and excellence looked like in practice. Their sudden deployment sent an unspoken message that even the most significant personal milestones were secondary to military obligations. Lieutenant Amelia Hawthorne heard about the deployments through the informal communication network that connected all base personnel. Standing in the staging area where graduates were assembling for final preparations, she listened as her fellow graduates discussed the situation in hushed tones. Harrison was supposed to give the response speech on behalf of all honorees, one graduate mentioned. "Now they're scrambling to find a replacement. William's wife is in the medical bay," another added. "Apparently she's having complications with her pregnancy." The stress of him being deployed suddenly might have triggered early labor. Thompson's whole family drove here from Colorado. His granddaughter made some kind of special banner for him. Amelia felt a familiar tightness in her chest, the same feeling she had experienced countless times throughout her childhood when her grandmother's nursing shifts ran long, when school events conflicted with medical emergencies, when personal celebrations took second place to people who needed help more urgently. But this time was different. This time, she wasn't the child watching a parent choose duty over presence. She was the military professional who understood, perhaps better than anyone, that some obligations transcended personal desires. Standing in her perfect dress whites, wearing her grandmother's ring as promised, Amelia found herself thinking about Rosalind's stories from Vietnam. How many times had her grandmother been forced to choose between personal milestones and saving lives? How many celebrations had she missed? How many family gatherings had she abandoned? How many moments of personal joy had she sacrificed because wounded soldiers needed her expertise more than she needed recognition? The irony wasn't lost on her. She was about to be recognized for completing training that prepared her for exactly these kinds of situations. Moments when duty calls at the worst possible time. When personal desires have to yield to urgent needs. When being a SEAL means accepting that your most important days might belong to strangers who need saving. At 1315 hours, 15 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin, Captain Rodriguez's voice came over the base communication system with an announcement that would change everything. Ladies and gentlemen, families and graduates, we are proceeding with today's ceremony as planned. However, I must inform you that 3 of our honorees have been deployed on an emergency rescue operation involving American servicemen in distress. Lieutenant Commander Harrison, Petty Officer Williams, and Master Chief Thompson are currently en route to save the lives of 47 sailors who are trapped underwater following a maritime disaster. The announcement was met with a complex mixture of pride, frustration, and resignation from the assembled families. They understood the importance of the mission, but understanding didn't make the disappointment any less real. Amelia straightened her shoulders and adjusted her grandmother's ring one final time. In a few minutes, she would walk onto that parade ground and become the 47th woman in history to receive the Navy SEAL Trident pin. She would do it alone, without family in the audience, representing not just her own achievement, but the legacy of all the military families who had learned to celebrate victories, while their heroes were off saving others. She had no idea that wearing her grandmother's ring would soon reveal connections that would transform this ceremony into something far more significant than anyone could imagine. What Captain Rodriguez didn't know was that his announcement about the emergency deployment had been overheard by Senior Chief Petty Officer Marcus Titan Valdez, a 22-year Navy SEAL veteran who was working security detail for the graduation ceremony. Valdez had served multiple deployments with all 3 of the deployed specialists, and he understood immediately that something unprecedented was developing. But more importantly, Valdez had been present at Naval Special Warfare Command Headquarters 3 months ago when a classified briefing had mentioned Lieutenant Amelia Hawthorne by name. The briefing hadn't been about her SEAL training. It had been about genealogical research connected to a 50-year-old intelligence investigation involving female military personnel who had served in classified operations during the Vietnam War. Valdez remembered the briefing specifically because the investigating officer had shown a photograph of an antique emerald ring and asked if anyone had seen similar jewelry among current or former military personnel. The ring in the photograph had looked exactly like the one he had noticed Lieutenant Hawthorne wearing during training exercises, the same distinctive emerald surrounded by 12 tiny diamonds, the same worn gold band that suggested decades of careful wear. At 13:27 hours, while families were being escorted to their seats and graduates were forming up for the ceremonial procession, Valdez made a decision that would change everything. He activated his secure communication device and placed a priority call to the Naval Special Warfare Historical Research Division, a small, classified unit responsible for investigating military personnel records that had been sealed for national security reasons. This is Senior Chief Valdez, Security Detail at Coronado. I need to speak with whoever is handling the Hawthorne genealogy investigation. Immediately. The voice that answered belonged to Dr. Rebecca Chun, a civilian historian who had spent the past 18 months trying to piece together the classified service records of 3 generations of American women who had served in highly sensitive military operations. Her research had been prompted by the recent declassification of certain Vietnam-era documents that suggested several female military personnel had participated in operations that were never officially acknowledged. Senior Chief, this is Dr. Chun. Are you calling about Lieutenant Amelia Hawthorne? Ma'am, she's about to graduate in 30 minutes, and she's wearing the ring from your investigation. The emerald ring with the 12 diamonds. I'm looking at it right now. There was a long silence before Dr. Chun responded, and when she did, her voice carried the excitement of someone who had just discovered the final piece of a puzzle that had consumed years of her professional life. Senior Chief, I need you to listen very carefully. That ring doesn't just belong to Lieutenant Hawthorne. It's a piece of classified military history that connects 3 generations of women who served in operations so sensitive that their records were sealed under national security protocols. Her great-grandmother, Captain Sarah Hawthorne, didn't just fly transport planes during World War II. She flew classified intelligence missions over Nazi-occupied territory, carrying agents and extracting prisoners of war from locations that officially didn't exist. Valdez felt his understanding of the situation shift dramatically. Ma'am, what about her grandmother? Sergeant Major Rosalind Hawthorne didn't just serve as a combat nurse in Vietnam. She was part of a classified unit that conducted medical evacuations in Cambodia and Laos, operations that were never acknowledged because they violated international treaties. She personally saved over 200 wounded soldiers from locations where American forces were never supposed to be operating. Dr. Chun's voice grew more urgent. Senior Chief, both women received commendations that were classified above top secret. Their heroism was never publicly recognized because acknowledging their achievements would have revealed military operations that are still sensitive today. That ring has been present at more classified military operations than any other piece of personal military equipment in American history. The Trident frozen at more classified military operations than any other piece of personal military equipment in American history. The implications hit Valdez immediately. Ma'am, are you telling me that Lieutenant Hawthorne is graduating today without any family present, and she's wearing a ring that represents 3 generations of unrecognized military heroism? That's exactly what I'm telling you. And Senior Chief, there's something else you need to know. When I started this investigation, I discovered that there are currently 47 retired military personnel living within a 200-mile radius of Coronado who served alongside either Captain Sarah Hawthorne or Sergeant Major Rosalind Hawthorne. These are people who witnessed their classified heroism firsthand. People who have spent decades knowing that 2 of the bravest women in American military history never received the recognition they deserved. Valdez looked across the parade ground at Lieutenant Hawthorne, standing in formation with her fellow graduates, completely unaware that she was wearing a piece of living military history. Dr. Chun, are you saying that there are people still alive who knew her great-grandmother and grandmother? I'm saying more than that. I'm saying there are people who owe their lives to the Hawthorne women, people who have been waiting 50 years for the opportunity to honor that debt. Senior Chief, I've been trying to locate these veterans for months, but tracking down people from classified operations is incredibly difficult. Most of them don't even know that others from their units are still alive. An idea began forming in Valdez's mind, an idea so audacious that it would require every connection he had built during 22 years in the SEAL community. Ma'am, what if I told you I could locate and contact these veterans within the next 20 minutes? I'd say that would be the most important thing that could happen for military historical justice, but I don't see how it's possible in such a short time frame. Valdez smiled grimly. Ma'am, you're about to learn something about the SEAL community that civilians don't usually understand. When we need to find people quickly, especially people with military backgrounds, we have resources that can work miracles. He ended the call with Dr. Chun and immediately activated the most powerful communication network in the FAO military community, the informal connections between active and retired special operations personnel. Valdez began making rapid calls to SEAL team leaders, retired special operations officers, and veteran organization coordinators throughout Southern California. His message was simple and urgent. I need to locate any living veterans who served with Captain Sarah Hawthorne during World War II classified operations, or with Sergeant Major Rosalind Hawthorne during Vietnam classified operations. This is for the Hawthorne family granddaughter who is graduating SEAL training in 25 minutes. With no family present, the response was immediate and overwhelming. Within 8 minutes, Valdez had received callbacks from 6 different veteran organizations. Within 12 minutes, he had contact information for 19 veterans who had served with the Hawthorne women. Within 15 minutes, word had spread through veteran networks from San Diego to Los Angeles, and retired military personnel who hadn't spoken in decades were making contact with each other. Master Sergeant James Bear Morrison, now 78 years old, had been a young paratrooper when Captain Sarah Hawthorne flew him out of Nazi-occupied France in 1944. He lived in Escondido, just 45 minutes from Coronado. When Valdez's call reached him, Morrison was working in his garden, living quietly on his military pension. "You're telling me that Sarah Hawthorne's great-granddaughter is graduating SEAL training today?" Morrison asked, his voice suddenly strong despite his age. "Son, Sarah Hawthorne saved my life and the lives of 8 other soldiers when she landed her transport plane in a field that was under enemy fire. I've been waiting 78 years to thank someone from her family." Colonel Patricia Phoenix Washington, retired, age 71, had served as a combat medic alongside Sergeant Major Rosalind Hawthorne in classified operations along the Cambodian border. When she received Valdez's call at her home in Oceanside, she immediately understood the significance of the moment. "Rosalind Hawthorne was the bravest woman I ever served with," Washington said. "She ran into enemy fire to pull wounded soldiers to safety more times than I can count. Her granddaughter is graduating today. With no family present? That's not acceptable." As word spread through the veteran networks, something unprecedented began happening. Veterans who had spent decades in quiet retirement, who rarely spoke about their classified service, who had carried the weight of unrecognized heroism for half a century, began mobilizing with the efficiency and purpose that had made them effective soldiers 50 years earlier. By 1342 hours, 13 minutes before the graduation ceremony was scheduled to begin, Senior Chief Valdez had accomplished something that military historians would later describe as impossible. He had located and contacted 43 living veterans who had served with the Hawthorne women in classified operations, and 37 of them were within driving distance of Naval Amphibious Base Coronado. Community realization was spreading like wildfire through the most connected network in American society, the brotherhood and sisterhood of military veterans who understood that some debts of honor transcend time, distance, and the normal boundaries of what people consider possible. At exactly 13:57 hours, 3 minutes before the graduation ceremony was scheduled to begin, the main gate at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado experienced something that security personnel would later describe as controlled chaos. 17 vehicles arrived simultaneously, a convoy that included everything from pristine vintage military jeeps to modern SUVs, driven by elderly veterans who had responded to Senior Chief Valdez's urgent calls with the kind of immediate mobilization that had defined their military careers. Decades earlier, the base security checkpoint, designed to process normal visitor traffic, suddenly faced an influx of 37 veterans ranging in age from 68 to 91, all demanding immediate access to attend a graduation ceremony that had officially closed its guest registration hours earlier. What made the situation even more extraordinary was the caliber of military credentials being presented: Purple Hearts, Silver Stars, Bronze Stars with V-device, and commendations from classified operations that required additional security clearance verification. Master Sergeant James Bear Morrison, despite his 78 years, had driven from Escondido with the urgency of a man half his age. In his passenger seat sat Colonel Patricia Phoenix Washington, who had coordinated the convoy using communication skills she hadn't employed since her retirement 15 years earlier. Behind them, a caravan of veterans stretched back toward the highway, men and women who had dropped everything to attend a ceremony for someone they had never met, to honor a debt they had carried for over 5 decades. The base commander's office received an emergency call from the security checkpoint at 13:59 hours. "Sir, we have a situation developing at the main gate. 37 veterans with verified classified service records are requesting immediate ceremony access. They claim they have a connection to Lieutenant Hawthorne and are presenting documentation that requires your personal review." Captain Rodriguez, who was already in position on the parade ground preparing to begin the ceremony, felt his carefully managed schedule completely derail. Through his earpiece, he could hear the security coordinator's voice growing more urgent. "Sir, we've verified the credentials of 12 of these veterans, and their classified service records are ... extraordinary. We're talking about people with commendations that are still above our clearance level." At the ceremony staging area, Lieutenant Amelia Hawthorne stood in perfect formation with her 22 fellow graduates, completely unaware that the most significant moment of her life was about to become something far beyond what she had imagined possible. She could see the parade ground filling with families, could hear the pre-ceremony music beginning, could feel the weight of her grandmother's ring on her finger, the only family present she would have during this historic achievement. The first sign that something extraordinary was happening came at 14:01 hours, when the ceremony music suddenly stopped. Captain Rodriguez's voice came over the public address system with an announcement that confused everyone present. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are implementing a brief delay in our ceremony start time to accommodate some very special guests who are currently being processed through security." The gathered families exchanged puzzled glances. Military ceremonies operated with clockwork precision. Delays simply didn't happen without extraordinary circumstances. The graduates remained at attention, but whispers began circulating through the ranks as they tried to understand what could possibly justify postponing a ceremony that had been planned with military precision for months. At 14:03 hours, Senior Chief Valdez appeared at Captain Rodriguez's side on the parade platform. His voice was quiet but urgent. "Sir, I need 60 seconds to explain what's happening, and then I need your permission to do something that's never been done in the history of Navy SEAL graduations." Rodriguez nodded, and Valdez quickly outlined the situation: the classified service records of Lieutenant Hawthorne's family, the veterans who had served with them, and the unprecedented opportunity to honor 3 generations of military heroism that had been hidden from public recognition for over half a century. "Sir," Valdez concluded, "these veterans have driven from across Southern California in the past hour. Some of them are in wheelchairs. Some of them are using oxygen tanks. All of them are here because they owe their lives to the Hawthorne women, and they've been waiting decades for the chance to honor that debt." Captain Rodriguez stared across the parade ground at Lieutenant Hawthorne, standing in formation, completely unaware that her family's classified legacy was about to be revealed. "Senior Chief, what exactly are you requesting permission to do?" "Sir, I'm requesting permission to escort these veterans onto the parade ground as honored guests, and to allow them to present Lieutenant Hawthorne with the recognition that her family should have received decades ago, but couldn't because of classification restrictions." The request was unprecedented. Military ceremonies followed established protocols that didn't accommodate last-minute additions, especially not additions involving classified historical information. But Rodriguez understood that some moments transcended normal procedures. At 14:05 hours, the main gate security checkpoint received clearance to escort the veteran convoy directly to the ceremony area. What happened next would be remembered by everyone present as one of the most emotionally powerful moments in military ceremonial history. The first vehicle to arrive at the parade ground was Morrison's vintage Jeep, restored to military specifications and displaying license plates that read 44 Para, a reference to his paratrooper service in 1944. As he slowly emerged from the driver's seat, using a walking cane but maintaining the posture of a soldier, the gathered families fell silent. Behind Morrison, Colonel Washington stepped out of the passenger side wearing her dress uniform from her retirement ceremony, complete with ribbons that included commendations most civilians had never seen. Her bearing was unmistakably military despite her 71 years, and she moved with the purposeful stride of someone who had spent decades in leadership positions. The convoy continued arriving in rapid succession. Vietnam veterans wearing unit patches from operations that had never been publicly acknowledged. Korean War veterans displaying commendations for classified missions. World War II veterans whose service records included operations so sensitive that the details remain classified 78 years later. As the veterans assembled near the parade ground, Captain Rodriguez realized he was witnessing something that went beyond a normal ceremonial addition. These weren't just elderly military retirees attending a graduation. These were living representatives of American military operations that had been hidden from public recognition for decades, all united by their connection to 3 generations of Hawthorne women. At 14:08 hours, Senior Chief Valdez approached the formation where Lieutenant Hawthorne stood with her fellow graduates. His voice was quiet but clear. "Lieutenant Hawthorne, there are some people here who would like to meet you. People who knew your great-grandmother and your grandmother. People who have been waiting a long time to thank someone from your family." Amelia's carefully maintained military composure wavered for the first time. "Senior Chief, I don't understand. My great-grandmother and grandmother are deceased, and I don't have any family connections to other military personnel." Valdez smiled gently. "Ma'am, you're about to discover that your family has more military connections than you ever imagined. And that ring you're wearing has been present at more acts of heroism than any other piece of equipment in American military history, as if choreographed by decades of military precision." The 37 veterans began moving toward the parade ground in formation. Despite their ages, despite wheelchairs and walking canes and oxygen tanks, they moved with the unmistakable bearing of soldiers who had once been among America's finest warriors. Ceremony audience of 2,000 people fell into complete silence as they witnessed something unprecedented. A spontaneous honor guard composed of veterans whose collective service spanned from World War II to the global war on terror, all united in their determination to honor a family legacy that had been hidden in classified documents for over 50 years. Lieutenant Amelia Hawthorne was about to discover that she wasn't graduating alone after all. She was graduating in the presence of people who owed their lives to her family's courage, and who had spent decades waiting for the opportunity to say thank you. Master Sergeant James Bear Morrison stepped forward first, his 78-year-old frame moving with deliberate precision despite the walking cane that supported his weight. As he approached Lieutenant Amelia Hawthorne, who remained at attention in formation, his weathered eyes fixed directly on the emerald ring that adorned her left hand. When he spoke, his voice carried across the silent parade ground with the clarity of someone who had spent decades as a military instructor. "Lieutenant Hawthorne, my name is James Morrison. On November 15, 1944, your great-grandmother, Captain Sarah Hawthorne, landed her transport aircraft in a field outside Normandy that was under active enemy fire. She extracted 9 wounded American soldiers, including myself, from behind German lines. I was 19 years old, bleeding from shrapnel wounds, and certain I was going to die in occupied France. Morrison's voice grew stronger as he continued, drawing energy from memories that had sustained him for nearly 8 decades. Your great-grandmother didn't just save our lives that day. She landed her plane 3 times under enemy fire to make sure she got every wounded soldier out. The 3rd landing damaged her aircraft so severely that she barely made it back to Allied territory. She never received official recognition for that mission, because acknowledging it would have revealed classified intelligence operations. The silence on the parade ground was absolute. 2,000 people listened as Morrison reached into his jacket and withdrew a small leather pouch that showed the wear of decades of careful preservation. Lieutenant, I've carried something for 78 years, waiting for the opportunity to return it to your family. Morrison opened the pouch and revealed a small piece of torn fabric, olive drab material, with dried bloodstains still visible after all these years. This is a piece of your great-grandmother's flight jacket. She tore it off to use as a bandage for my wounds during the extraction. I've kept it as a reminder that there are people in this world who will risk everything to save strangers. As Morrison spoke, other veterans began stepping forward, each carrying their own pieces of history, their own connections to the Hawthorne legacy that Lieutenant Amelia had never known existed. Colonel Patricia Phoenix Washington moved forward next, her 71-year-old frame still carrying the unmistakable bearing of a career military officer. Lieutenant Hawthorne, I served alongside your grandmother, Sergeant Major Rosalind Hawthorne, during classified medical operations along the Cambodian border from 1968 to 1970. Your grandmother didn't just serve. As a combat nurse, she was the most courageous medic I ever witnessed in 2 tours of duty. Washington's voice carried the weight of memories that had never been shared outside classified briefings. During the Tet Offensive, when our field hospital came under sustained mortar attack, your grandmother continued performing surgery on wounded soldiers while explosions were hitting our perimeter. She worked for 36 consecutive hours, saving 14 American lives and 6 South Vietnamese soldiers, all while enemy forces were attempting to overrun our position. Washington reached into her uniform pocket and withdrew a small military medal, a bronze star with V device for valor that showed the patina of age, but had been carefully preserved. Lieutenant, this bronze star was awarded to your grandmother for her actions during that attack, but the citation was classified because acknowledging the mission would have revealed American medical operations in Cambodia. Your grandmother never received public recognition, never had a ceremony, never had her family witness her receiving the honor she earned with her blood and courage. As Washington spoke, more veterans continued approaching, each carrying pieces of the hidden history that connected 3 generations of Hawthorne women to acts of heroism that had been buried in classified files for decades. Retired Navy Commander Douglas Anchor Chun, now 83 years old and using a wheelchair, had served as a pilot alongside Captain Sarah Hawthorne during classified intelligence missions over Nazi-occupied Europe. Lieutenant, your great-grandmother flew 18 classified missions carrying OSS agents behind enemy lines. She was shot down twice, captured once, and escaped from a German prisoner of war camp to continue her service. Her flight records were classified because the intelligence operations she supported remained sensitive for national security reasons. Sergeant Major Maria Steele Rodriguez, 76 years old, had served as a field medic alongside Sergeant Major Rosalind Hawthorne during retired Navy Commander Douglas Anchor Chun, now 83 years old and using a wheelchair, had served as a pilot alongside Captain Sarah Hawthorne during classified intelligence missions over Nazi-occupied Europe. Lieutenant, your great-grandmother flew 18 classified missions carrying OSS agents behind enemy lines. She was shot down twice, captured once, and escaped from a German prisoner of war camp to continue her service. Her flight records were classified because the intelligence operations she supported remained sensitive for national security reasons. Sergeant Major Maria Steele Rodriguez, 76 years old, had served as a field medic alongside Sergeant Major Rosalind Hawthorne during classified operations in Laos. "Lieutenant, your grandmother saved my life during a helicopter extraction under enemy fire. She rappelled down from the aircraft to treat my wounds while we were taking incoming rounds, then carried me to the extraction point on her back. I've spent 43 years wanting to thank someone from her family." As each veteran shared their testimony, Lieutenant Amelia Hawthorne's carefully maintained military composure began to crumble. Tears streamed down her face as she listened to stories of heroism and sacrifice that revealed her family legacy in terms far beyond anything her grandmother had ever shared during their quiet conversations in Colorado. The emotional transformation rippled through the entire ceremony audience. Families who had come to witness their own loved ones' achievements found themselves witnessing something far more profound: the revelation of classified military heroism spanning 3 generations, the payment of debts that had been carried for over 50 years, and the recognition of courage that had been hidden from public acknowledgement due to national security requirements. Master Chief Petty Officer Rebecca "Tsunami" Thompson, despite being 74 years old, stepped forward with the bearing of someone who had spent decades in leadership positions. "Lieutenant Hawthorne, I need you to understand something about that ring you're wearing. It's not just a family heirloom, it's a piece of living military history. That emerald has been present during more classified operations than any other personal item in American military service." Thompson's voice grew emotional as she continued. "Your great-grandmother wore that ring during every classified mission she flew over Nazi territory. Your grandmother wore it during every classified medical operation in Southeast Asia. Now you're wearing it as you become a Navy SEAL. That ring represents 3 generations of women who refused to accept limitations others tried to place on them, who served with distinction in roles where women weren't supposed to be capable of success." The crowd of 2,000 people rose to their feet spontaneously, creating a standing ovation that lasted for over 3 minutes. But the applause wasn't just for Lieutenant Hawthorne's achievement in completing SEAL training. It was recognition of a family legacy that had finally been revealed after decades of classification restrictions. Captain Rodriguez stepped forward, his voice carrying across the parade ground with newfound understanding of what he was witnessing. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we are experiencing today goes beyond a normal graduation ceremony. We are witnessing the revelation of classified American military heroism spanning 3 generations. We are seeing the payment of debts of honor that have been carried by our veteran community for over 50 years. Rodriguez turned directly to Lieutenant Hawthorne, who was still struggling to process the magnitude of what had been revealed. "Lieutenant, your family's service to this nation extends far beyond what you knew. Your great-grandmother and grandmother served with such distinction in classified operations that their heroism couldn't be publicly acknowledged. Today, that changes." As the veterans continued sharing their testimonies, Lieutenant Amelia Hawthorne began to understand that she wasn't just graduating as an individual achievement. She was graduating as the continuation of a legacy of courage that had been tested in the most dangerous circumstances American military forces had ever faced. The emerald ring on her finger, which she had worn as a simple promise to her dying grandmother, was revealing itself as a symbol of heroism that connected her to military operations spanning from World War II to Vietnam, operations where her family had saved lives, broken barriers, and served with distinction in roles where women weren't supposed to be capable of success. Her tears were no longer tears of loneliness or isolation. They were tears of pride, understanding, and connection to a legacy of courage she had never known existed. 6 hours later, As the Pacific sun began setting over Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, Lieutenant Amelia Hawthorne sat in the base communications center, wearing her dress whites with the Navy SEAL Trident pin gleaming on her chest, speaking via secure satellite link to 3 exhausted but triumphant voices broadcasting from a rescue vessel in the South China Sea. "Amelia, we watched your entire graduation ceremony on the live feed," came the voice of Lieutenant Commander Harrison, his words slightly distorted by the encrypted connection, but carrying unmistakable emotion. "When those veterans walked onto that parade ground, when we saw what was happening, we realized we weren't just missing a ceremony. We were witnessing something that will change military history." Through the satellite link, Amelia could hear the sounds of helicopter rotors and medical equipment in the background. The rescue operation that had called these 3 specialists away from their recognition ceremony had achieved complete success. All 47 trapped sailors from the USS Intrepid had been extracted alive from their underwater prison, with injuries ranging from minor to serious but no fatalities. "Sir," Amelia responded, her voice still carrying the emotional weight of the day's revelations, "I need you to know that your absence today wasn't abandonment. It was exactly what my great-grandmother and grandmother would have done. You chose to save lives over personal recognition, and that choice turned out to create something far more meaningful than any normal ceremony could have been." Petty Officer Williams, whose pregnant wife had given birth to a healthy daughter just 3 hours earlier at the base medical facility, joined the conversation with exhaustion mixed with joy in his voice. "Lieutenant, my wife Jennifer watched the ceremony from her hospital bed after the delivery. She said watching those veterans honor your family helped her understand why military service sometimes means missing the moments we plan to share. Our daughter is going to grow up knowing that her father was saving American sailors while other heroes were honoring 3 generations of American heroism." Master Chief Thompson, speaking from the rescue vessel's medical bay, where he was treating decompression injuries among the extracted sailors, added his perspective with the wisdom of 28 years in military service. "Amelia, what happened today proves something I've believed throughout my entire career. Real honor isn't about being present for recognition. It's about living values that inspire others to carry forward your legacy. When you can't be there yourself." The satellite connection carried a brief pause before Lieutenant Commander Harrison continued with information that would transform Amelia's understanding even further. "Lieutenant, there's something else you need to know. During our rescue operation, we discovered that 3 of the trapped sailors we extracted are descendants of military personnel who served alongside your great-grandmother during World War II classified operations. The chief petty officer we pulled out first, CPO Michael Patterson, is the grandson of Sergeant Robert Patterson, who was one of the soldiers your great-grandmother saved during that extraction mission in occupied France." Amelia felt the emerald ring on her finger seemed to carry even more weight as the implications settled over her. "Sir, are you telling me that today's rescue operation involved descendants of people my great-grandmother saved 78 years ago?" "That's exactly what we're telling you," Williams responded. "CPO Patterson specifically asked us to relay a message. His family has carried the story of Captain Sarah Hawthorne's heroism for 3 generations, never knowing if anyone from her family was still alive. When he learned that his rescuers had missed their ceremony to save his life, and that the ceremony revealed your family's classified legacy, he said it felt like military history, completing a circle that started in 1944. The Rodriguez's voice carried the weight of someone who had spent 30 years in military service and understood the rarity of what they had experienced. "But more importantly, your graduation has resolved historical injustices that have existed for decades. The Navy Department has decided to posthumously award your great-grandmother the Distinguished Flying Cross for her classified World War II operations, and your grandmother will receive the Silver Star for her classified Vietnam operations. These awards will be presented to you as their family representative. During a Pentagon ceremony next month, through the satellite link, the voices of the 3 deployed specialists carried a mixture of exhaustion, pride, and deep satisfaction that transcended their physical fatigue from 18 hours of dangerous rescue operations. Amelia, Master Chief Thompson said, his voice growing stronger despite his exhaustion, "I want you to understand something that took me 28 years to learn. Military service isn't about the ceremonies where we receive recognition. It's about the moments when we choose duty over comfort, when we put other people's desperate needs ahead of our personal desires, when we demonstrate that some values are worth more than individual convenience." Lieutenant Commander Harrison added his perspective, with the authority of someone who had just completed one of the most technically challenging rescue operations in recent military history. "Your great-grandmother and grandmother never received public recognition because their heroism was classified. Today, their legacy was revealed not because of planned ceremony, but because duty called us away from that ceremony. The irony is perfect. The same choice they made throughout their careers created the circumstances that finally brought their heroism into the light." As the conversation continued, Amelia began to understand that her graduation day had become something far beyond personal achievement. It had become a resolution of historical injustices, a payment of debts carried by the veteran community for over 50 years, and a demonstration that military values transcend individual recognition. 37 veterans who had converged on Coronado that afternoon had spent the hours after the ceremony sharing stories, photographs, and memories that had been classified for decades. Master Sergeant Morrison had presented Amelia with a leather-bound journal containing written accounts from every veteran present, documenting the classified heroism of her great-grandmother and grandmother in their own words. Colonel Washington had organized the veterans into a permanent network dedicated to preserving the history of classified military operations involving women who served in combat roles before such service was officially acknowledged. "Lieutenant," she had explained, "your family's story represents thousands of women whose military heroism was hidden for national security reasons. Today begins the process of ensuring that history remembers their contributions." As the satellite link conversation concluded, Lieutenant Amelia Hawthorne looked down at her grandmother's emerald ring, understanding finally why Rosalind had insisted it be worn visibly during the graduation ceremony. The ring had served as a beacon, attracting the recognition that 3 generations of Hawthorne women had earned but never received. "Thank you," she said to the 3 specialists still working rescue operations half a world away, "for showing me that the highest form of honor isn't receiving recognition. It's living values that inspire others to carry forward your legacy when you can't be there to see it yourself." 6 months later, when Lieutenant Amelia Hawthorne deployed on her first classified SEAL operation, she carried with her a mission briefing that included a specific notation: "Operation continues legacy established by Captain Sarah Hawthorne, World War II Classified Operations, and Sergeant Major Rosalind Hawthorne, Vietnam Classified Operations. Mission success honors 3 generations of Hawthorne family service. The Emerald Ring, now officially recognized as a piece of American military history, would accompany the next generation of classified heroism, ensuring that some legacies transcend the individual moments when they're tested, and that real honor is measured not by the recognition we receive, but by the values we demonstrate when no one is watching, and the courage we inspire in others long after our service has ended." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.